Hi everyone, today I'm excited to show you the Metal Earth series Ironman model, and this is actually my first color model series for Metal Earth, and I was actually really afraid to work on this one just because with the history of Metal Earth they're actually very prone to scratching, and I was afraid that while I was building it I would scratch the sheet and actually exposing the metal behind it. But as I was working with it, I realized that it was actually not that bad, and it actually ends up being a very great model, and the color really does add a lot of depth to it that I think moving forward I'll be doing a lot more of the color Metal Earth series. And it is very fitting that the Ironman actually has color, because the gold and the red really does identify it as Ironman, because they do have the other model, which is actually War Machine, and that one actually has no finish on it. So I think the Ironman with its color actually makes it look nicer. So we're going to start off by shaping the feet, and this is going to be the base of the feet itself that we're going to be making by bending the shapes together. And it is actually a lot of angles, so even though it looks like it's a curvature because of it being Ironman, I guess they kept with more angles more than curvatures, and then you get more curvatures on the upper body portions itself. I was very careful when I was bending the pieces, especially because when I'm folding the tabs, I was using a flat tweezer or a very flat surface, just so that I'm not actually scratching the surface, because when you're actually twisting and bending the pieces, the outer layer of the red coat actually does scratch off pretty easily. So I wanted to make sure that I had a clean model as much as possible, and that was easily being done using the needle nose plier and the tweezer. While I was building this Ironman, I was very skeptical, or actually nervous, building it because of the complexity of the model and a lot of the interlocking parts. I was afraid that it will actually break off very easily and it was going to be a really hard build. But surprisingly, it was actually not that bad. It was actually a relatively okay model. It is very challenging still, and in comparison, I worked on the Gundam model, which was about the same scale, and the Gundam model was actually really hard, and they had a lot more small pieces. With the Iron Man, there are some small pieces like the spine piece and part of the helmets and stuff, but for the most part, the pieces were very easy to work with. That surprisingly, it was actually easier than the Gundam model. There is one portion that I will show you later where some of the pieces did snap off, and that was actually when I was working on the first arm piece, and it's because I made a mistake, and I'll show you later what the mistake was. But because of that, that was the only part where pieces broke off and it was actually challenging. The rest of the build was pretty straightforward, and I didn't really have a lot of mishaps. Part of the challenge for this build were some of the pieces where it curves, but it actually curves in two different directions. So it was actually hard because you have to make sure to bend it slowly, little by little, one way and then the other direction, and then going back to the other way, and kind of repeating it until it kind of has a nice smooth curvature. And there were not too many of those, and it actually did bend pretty easily just because of all the scoring that was done on the backside. And so it was actually not too bad when I was working on this model. So this model is interesting because it's actually coated on both sides of the sheet, which is pretty nice, because some of the other ones, if you have a misalignment, you will actually end up seeing the back side of the sheet metal, which is actually plain, and it shows like a silver marking on it. And that's why with this Ironman model, just because it was actually coated all the way around, even if you were kind of misaligned, it's okay because you're still seeing the backside, which is red. And I'm not sure, but I believe that you actually have two options of building this Ironman model depending on which face you're using. And so one face has more of a matte finish with a lot more engraving and a lot more texture on it, while the other side is actually pretty flat and it's very shiny. And if you look at the model that was actually on the page itself of the cover of the Metal Earth shows a very shiny Iron Man suit, but when I built it, mine had more of a matte finish, and it's because I actually opted to use the side with the engraving and the line work just to show more curvature and more detail. And personally, I actually do like the matte finish more, just because I feel like it ends up looking more like a premium model. I'm not a big fan of the very shiny models just because I feel like sometimes the shininess makes it look kind of cheap sometimes. That's just my personal preference. As you can see here, there's a lot of these times where you're fitting one piece completely over the other piece, and it is a little difficult. So you want to make sure that the piece that's going over is actually wider than it needs to be, so that you can actually go over the piece, because the tabs have to be at a perpendicular angle so that it fits through, and then you kind of squeeze the parts back into place. I really do like the gold plate additions. It adds a very nice accent color to the red of the Ironman bodysuit, and I think it is very characteristic of Ironman to have that kind of hot rod red and the gold plates. So you know, I just think that this was a very great example of using color on a Metal Earth model. So one thing that I really do appreciate about this Ironman model is that between every joint, so where you have, let's say, your foot to your ankle, and then your ankle to your thigh, ankle to the calf, then the calf to the knee and thigh, each part is connected by using a metal plate. And the plate actually acts as a stiffener, because if not, when you're pressing, you might actually press it in too much, or you know, so that it actually helps really stiffen up the model so nothing becomes loose. To explain the process of building this model, what you do is you're starting from pretty much the ground up to the torso area, and then you're going to start working head down. So you're going to start with the head piece and the neck, and then the shoulder and the chest, and then after you have the upper body and your lower body, you're going to connect two body parts together to finish the Ironman suit. Another thing that actually helps making this whole model design rigid is actually the fact that they're doing layers upon layers. So you have a lot of interlocking and joining pieces that overlap each other a lot. And because of that, since you have multiple sheets of metal kind of overlapping each other, it does create a bit of a rigidity that actually helps the overall stiffness of the model, which is great. So these three spine pieces are actually like the smallest pieces in the whole model, and they are the most difficult for me to bend just because of how small these pieces are. But other than that, all the other pieces are relatively big, so it shouldn't be too hard. The upper torso area actually has a lot of curvatures, but luckily, because it is a bigger piece, you just do slight bends a little bit at a time, and you actually don't have to worry about bending some pieces too much. Some of the other Metal Earth models actually require you to make a cylinder shape from a really small piece, which is really hard to do, and a lot of times, even with the pliers that you're using, it is kind of hard to shape. And if you're using your plier too much, you actually end up scratching the surfaces a lot. But in this case, for the most parts, except for the edges, I was able to use my hands to kind of just shape it into place little by little. And I actually started off with less of a curvature, and then kind of finished out the curvature once I started attaching pieces together. When attaching the torso area to the hips, one trick that I did, because you're supposed to slide it in, I actually squeezed the upper torso by pressing down on the stomach area to kind of make it a little bit flatter, just so that it can go in easily, and then kind of balloon it up afterwards so that the tabs go through the right areas, and then kind of bend the pieces into place. So a lot of times with these overlapping pieces, like I said, you're going to either make one part either bigger or the other part squeezed down to make it narrower, and then you're gonna kind of push it, or you know, balloon it out into shape. So the build was relatively fast for the most part until I got to the shoulder area. The shoulder area was actually not difficult at all, it just was very time consuming, and so I actually ended up spending quite a bit of time shaping the shoulders into place. And I don't know why, because it's just maybe a few pieces that you're putting together, but it did require some time. With the shoulder piece, you're going to be creating one half of the shoulder, which is the front, and then the other half as the back, and they're going to be connected by two plates. And then you're going to create a strip that goes around and connects both plates together, and so it is a relatively easy build. The only cautionary I would have is to use a round tip plier if you can. So when you're bending the shapes, you're not actually scratching the surface and you're actually going to get a more smoother round surface. So this kind of arm area, the bicep and the tricep area, this is the part where I actually made a mistake, and you're going to see this very soon. So as you can see here, I accidentally closed the bicep area together, and then I realized that there's supposed to be a piece I was supposed to insert in, which was one of the plates. But I made the mistake of not putting in the plate first for this first arm, and so when I tried to fit the piece back in, it ended up breaking into a bunch of pieces. And so what I ended up doing here is glue all the biceps together, and then when I tried to attach the gold plate was now not being able to fit inside because of the glue drying and kind of expanding out the metal pieces. What ended up happening was that it created a bigger width than the gold plate can wrap around and fit in. And so while I was trying to work out the gold plate, it actually broke into half. And so as you can see in the previous images, what I ended up doing was the sheet metal itself that contains all the parts has a lot of extra parts that you're not using. So what I ended up doing was cutting off, using my wire cutter, 2 small segments from the sheet metal itself, and then kind of gluing it on to kind of close off the gap between the 2 gold plates that used to be one piece. So my original plan for that bicep once it broke was that I was actually going to contact Metal Earth, and I actually did end up going onto their website that you can actually go onto if you ever have a missing part or a broken part, or you're not sure about a certain step. You can always contact Metal Earth using their contact us form that's on their website, and I'll show you the link below. And I actually did get a response back from Metal Earth asking me to take a photo from the actual manual itself of the part that I'm missing or the part that broke, and they will actually ship you the new piece. But I was actually just being impatient just because I didn't want to wait a few days to get the part, so I ended up just fixing the piece by what I described earlier, by adding the 2 gold plates together. But if you actually want to have a cleaner build, just reach out to them. They do reply pretty quickly, and once you get the image and the part that you need, the part number, over to them, they will actually send it right away. So this is a great tip for the Metal Earth series in general that I think not a lot of people know. I do want to talk about the hands for this Ironman series, just because I really like how they did the hand for this one versus the Gundam model, just because this one was a lot easier to build for the hand, because you just have pretty much 2 plates that you're kind of bending each finger by the ribs, and then kind of joining together, and then kind of just making sure that the fingertips meet together. In comparison, the Gundam model requires a few parts that you're bending in 90-degree angles in multiple parts, that I think you have at least 10 little folds of 90 degrees within that small little hand. And because of that, one of my arms, or actually one of my hands for the Gundam, actually did break apart just because of all the folds that you need to do. So in comparison, this Ironman model was a lot easier to do. So I had this idea for the Ironman model after the build that I kind of wish I did, and I may do it by purchasing another kit and redoing this model. But the idea was, as you know, with Ironman, his iconic arc reactor and then his repulsor blast, it lights up. So I was thinking that it would actually be really cool to install some mini LED lights and then connect it to a power source like a USB or a battery. So I may look into that, and I was also thinking like the helmet, the eyes can actually glow up too, so that might be actually really interesting. So I may do it or I may not do it, just because I have so many other builds I have to do, but I think that'll be a really fun project to kind of introduce lighting into the Metal Earth series. For the helmet, what I ended up doing was shaping the 2 sides first and bending it, and then the top I actually started curving it as I was bending it and attaching the tab. So it's kind of like you're just kind of like rotating it into place and kind of just squeezing the tab as you go along. What's really cool is that as you can see, once you finish the chin area, you have that little front piece that you're going to be attaching the gold plate helmet, the mask to. And the way that you adhere the front mask is that you attach it on the top, and then on the bottom you kind of slide it underneath the chin area to hold it in place. But what could be really cool actually is to not connect it to the chin and just kind of leave it up, you know, so that you kind of expose the inside of the helmet. And I thought it would be pretty funny if, you know, I kind of printed out a photo of RDJ's face and then kind of, you know, paste it on here. I didn't do this for this model, but I may do that as a little surprise later on, just so that, you know, like if it ever opens, then you're gonna see a face in there, which I thought would be pretty funny. So this is what I was explaining, where to fit that front face mask down, you actually have to bend it down and then kind of insert it underneath the chin jaw area. And then the head part is complete. And now we're going to continue on in creating the neck and then the kind of the clavicle area, and then we're going to be attaching that to the chest piece. Surprisingly, the neck area took a lot longer than I expected, considering it's such a simple part, you know, and it's just a small piece. It's just the neck, and you don't really see a lot of the neck, but it was actually a considerable amount of parts. It's not a lot of parts, it's just that it felt like it was more than it needed to be in a sense, but it does look great, and it wasn't too hard to do. It just was kind of a little bit of a time consuming part, but you know, overall, like, I think the rest of the build was a lot quicker. That there are these little parts where it feels just a lot longer, just because if you consider the amount of time that you spend and then the size of the part that you worked on, it kind of is disproportional to that. But I do understand, just because it is a very important part, and you know, the head is going to be actually attached to an angle, so it's actually looking kind of to the side, so it is understandable. It's just that when you're working with big pieces, it's actually easier and it's actually faster to shape the piece and attach them together, so you know, you don't spend a lot of time and you actually get a great portion of the model done. So we're shaping the chest piece, and one thing to comment is that the shoulder pieces are attached to the chest piece, so you want to be really careful when shaping it, because you don't want to be shaping and twisting it too much right where the shoulder and the chest piece meets, just because it is a thin strip that if you bend it too much, it might snap. But also remember that the right arm shoulder is actually going to be kind of lifted up, because if you look at the model itself, he raises his right hand forward to look like he's about to do a repulsor blast. Just know that you're gonna be shaping these kind of shoulder pads over the shoulder. So I actually ended up not bending it too much yet, just because I knew that I was gonna finish it up by kind of shaping it around the actual shoulder itself. This is kind of a lesson learned for Metal Earth models, where if I know that a piece is going to be wrapping around another piece, I actually don't overwork the metal, just to give me a little bit of leniency if I have to correct something. As much as I love these gold accent colors, these are kind of small parts, and some of them were really hard to bend, and part of it just has to do with the volume to surface ratio, so that the smaller pieces are actually a little bit harder to bend without warping the piece. So you know, it is quite a bit of work trying to add on these accent colors, and this is to the lower back area where you're not going to really see too much of. So when you connect the chest piece to the upper back area, you want to be really careful when sliding it in, because the tabs are pointed down. As you're sliding across, the tabs might actually scratch across the metal surface, and so you want to be just really careful when kind of interlocking the piece and joining the tabs together, so you're not scratching a lot of the red surface. So now we're almost done with the build, and we just have the two parts that we have to connect together. And as you can see, the upper body connects to the torso area to complete the model. And this was a little tricky just because of all the different angles and all the different tabs that have to connect to each other. But you know, it wasn't too bad, and it was actually pretty easy just because they gave a lot of wiggle room for you to kind of place the tabs in, which was great. And as you can see, the shoulders were lifted up, and I'm going to be pushing it down and then kind of shaping it around it so that it goes into its final shape once the whole part is built. And here it is. Here's the final model. This is the Ironman Metal Earth series, and it's a great model, and I just really love how it came together really well. And here are the final model shots. I took this just with my camera, and actually used a macro lens onto my phone camera as an attachment to get some detail shots. And so as you can see here, you're gonna see the upper body, and then like the feet, and then like some of the other body part areas in a really close-up manner. And thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel or watch other videos that are on my channel.